Hello, it's Lauren, and this is Improving the World. I talk to improvisers from all over the world because je suis an improviser. So this time I talked to Órla McGovern. She is based out of Galway, Ireland, and we had quite the rousing discussion, y'all. It was fun. I do hope that you enjoy. First, let me introduce you. You are a multi-talented and faceted individual. You are a performer, an improviser, a storyteller. You teach so many things under the umbrella of improv and performance. What does that mean for you? What does an average day or week look like?
Generally, it's more of doing workshops in schools, maybe performing in the evenings. I'm also writing a lot of stuff too. So it could be something like doing a voiceover, because I do a little bit of that as well.
So you're doing voiceover. Do you do them with your own accent? I'm just curious now, and being nosy, different accents.
I do them with all sorts of accents. When I lived in Seattle, I was frequently called upon to do what they thought was a good English accent. I'm sure some English people would shudder. A lot of the time I did on hold for, some people like Jaguar, or I was a vending machine in Chicago, apparently. They wanted an English accent for that too. Very often it's my own, if I'm doing an animated piece. Vending machine. For cream, press 1. For bagels, press 2. That kind of stuff.
Bagels in a vending machine? Oh, people.
Yes.
Don't eat that. Oh, no.
I know. Apparently it exists. Yeah.
Okay. Probably the Japanese invented it. All right.
Yeah.
So when you get up on stage and you do improv, you can do anything and be anything, right? Theoretically. How much does the flexibility of gender come into play when you're on stage? So how much do you choose to shift and play with the topic of gender when you're performing?
I would say that has changed a lot for me over the years in terms of what's important and in terms of what gets focus. I do really like character-based work because my background, I suppose, is from scripted theatre, so I'm very much rooted in character. It's changed a lot over the last few years because obviously conversations about gender have come up an awful lot. I like to have stories about women on stage, not only as an improviser, as a playwright. So sometimes that will be at the forefront of my mind, and that will be quite obvious. So the character, if they're a doctor, they're a truck driver, they're a woman doing these things. And I suppose really in improv, it's a sort of a very circular conversation. Like, how do we only really do that by naming the person, and even then is that what gender is that person? Do we need to know the gender of the person? So it's I think it's an interesting story. Just the fact of putting maybe 6 or 7 women on stage in a cast together. I mean, people say improv, I don't want it to be political, but even the fact of seeing 7 women on stage together, it's really powerful, and it is quite political. So no matter what you are doing within that in terms of the content of the piece, or if you're doing a really funny, chuckly show, it really just, you're being political by showing up, I think.
Do you find that it's different for you when you do comedy specifically? Because sometimes scripted theater is funny and sometimes it's not, intentionally so or not. Sometimes improv is funny or it's not. Do you feel that there is a more playful allowance or blurring of lines or ability to flex what we do with gender when we are doing something in a comedy space, or do you think that it's irrelevant?
I think it's actually it's almost easier to offend, I find, in comedy. And I've changed my opinion on that a lot. Again, I'm always re-examining it, but I think when you're doing comedy, it's much easier to do a caricature. So it's much easier to step into a stereotype a little bit. Caricature I consider sort of in the middle, character on one side and stereotype on the other. I think if you're doing a dramatic scene, you're allowing the character to unfold more, and there isn't that pressure to find the punchline or get to the end or do something like that. I mean, for me, the improv I generally like to do is improv where it can be funny, it can be dramatic. We don't walk into a show knowing what the content's going to be, unless it's a short form pub show, a very short formy, fun structure up, and they will ask you to step into this really silly mode, and that's a completely different thing. But I find that if we're trying to make a piece that's quite political and it has an intention, obviously then that will lead you in a direction. I like to be quite physical on stage as well when I can. So I think sometimes the characters will just dictate rather than a narrative point. Yeah.
I love that you said about the fact that you're re-examining all the time. And I think that's so apt and important. And I'm curious about the fact that you do scripted work. You sometimes are taking things and trying to modernize them, you being the proverbial you. So when you're doing that and you're trying to take something and modernize it and bring it into the now, and you're going through a constant re-examining of how you portray people and characters and physical and gender, whatever, race, anything, if you're trying to take something and be respectful of an artwork which was not created now, but present it now, do you feel that you need to keep true to what it was originally or shift it for it being present tense appropriate?
I think with anything, any piece of art, for me personally, whether it be scripted theatre or storytelling or improvisation, and you're going into it with a goal, I want to know why that's important. Why? Either is it just really fun? Is it something that you want to make money with and you know will make money? Or is it a concept that's really interesting to you? Or is it a concept that's challenging? For example, there's a couple of, say, film noir shows that are doing the rounds with a lot of sort of tropes in them that we would consider to be outdated and particularly sexist. And you can either sort of dive into them and sort of put them into the light by exposing them and heightening them, or you can sort of switch them around. I saw a lovely show recently in Germany, and they did a sort of a film noir, and you know, she was playing the detective and he was very much all the supporting characters and sort of the slightly flirted with too much secretary and all this thing. So you can sort of, and it was quite shocking because they're like, oh, that's not, she can't be doing that. But you know, this is something that happens all the time. But when we look at it through a different lens and we reverse it a little bit, it sort of highlights the original sort of like misogyny or whatever that was going on. So it can be playful, I think, and dramatic at the same time.
Yeah. Sorry, you made me laugh. Hide the original misogyny. I love that because misogyny is fine, but we'll hide the old stuff. Yeah. Yeah. Lovely. So in terms of the lines of demarcation, when we're choosing to perform and play and portray and kind of mess with these established concepts or social norm challenges, that what you bring to it as the individual performer is a big piece of this. I mean, I don't know if it's more about the writing, the directing, the performer, if it's about skill level, your awareness. Maybe I, as the performer, am aware of what it is that I'm choosing to portray or play with. So now there's more of a social allowance because, like, I get it. I'm not being negligent. I'm being intentional. So I'm wondering if this is about the performance skill and the skill behind the creation of work, or if it is truly about the genre or the piece itself, or maybe how they support each other or clash, you know?
Yeah, I think it's all of those things. It's something obviously I discuss a lot, and a lot of people, if you hop onto any of those international improv boards on Facebook, you could be there for the rest of your life, kind of having a circular argument about these things. It's something I think about a lot, and I don't have an answer. And I think for me, the only thing that resonates constantly is true is your intention. What is your intention coming into a piece? I think you can have a scene be about racism in certain places, for example, and be able to make a statement and an interesting piece of improvised theatre by examining that if you're all on the same page. I also think that to do the same scene, maybe in a different country, would have a completely different reaction. So it's constantly a dialogue with your audience as well. It's a really tricky thing because there's that whole notion in comedy, and I'm going sort of into the stand-up world a little bit, that you know the freedom of expression has been taken away, and we have to be able to make fun of anything, and you can make fun of anything, and we should be doing that. But you know, sometimes people are just being a-holes and they just want to have a shock factor on stage, and that's not right either. So I think, yeah, we're walking the line all the time, even with storytelling, because I'm a storyteller as well. And of course the conversation comes up about cultural appropriation, taking a story from another culture, and that's a really hot topic because most of us storytellers agree that stories are meant to be shared. And there's a little bit of etiquette, you know, you just say to somebody, is it okay if I tell this story after you tell it to me? And some people believe you shouldn't tell a story from outside of your own culture, which I think for me, that's taking it a little bit too far. If I did that, I would miss lots of stories, and other people would miss lots of incredible old Irish myths, and
Mm.
we can't have that.
Yeah, and I want to ask, if you're told you shouldn't perform something, does that mean that you should? It's sort of a rhetorical question and sort of a real question. I mean, I feel that there are lines that we most certainly probably shouldn't cross, and we hopefully historically have learned that by now. But additionally, if you're told you shouldn't, maybe especially within the space of comedy, does that mean that you should? Is the taboo something we should be touching, poking, testing, trying, and putting that testing on stage, putting that, again, respectfully with the right intention, but if we shouldn't touch that, does that mean that's exactly what we should touch?
For me personally, there's a little bit, if you comes from me as a small child, if you tell me I shouldn't do something, don't touch the wet paint, that is definitely something sparks in me with that. I'm like, why am I being told not to touch it? What is so dangerous
Mm.
about it? What is so bad about it? I want to know more. I'm curious. I want to know why this is not to be spoken of. I want to know, can I speak of it in a year's time? Or is it something that's happened yesterday and it's very insensitive to talk about? I
Mm.
want to know who's telling me not to talk about it.
Yeah.
And is it somebody I should really be listening to? Or
Mm.
is it somebody I should be going, I don't think it's your right to tell me that. It's a really fascinating thing. And I'll give you an example. Just something that was like 10 or 15 years ago. I lived in Seattle, and I was lucky enough to work with some amazing performers on a show that was partially sketch and partially improvised.
Mm.
And there was a lot of amazing improvisers from Unexpected Productions in this show. It dealt with an old sort of Southern lady played by a man, and she was a little bit racist and a little bit homophobic, and very much based on real life people that this actor knew in his life. Very likable character, but like had all these not so likable traits about her. So
Mm.
we pushed the envelope quite far actually with this back in the day. We couldn't put the same show on in Seattle right now. We
Yeah.
couldn't have people in the audience who were people of color and plants and sort of saying like vaguely racist or homophobic things and having them come up and storm the stage. I think we had so much fun, and we challenged the way people have conversations about race and sexuality. We challenged it a lot, but I
Mm.
don't know if we could do that show in Seattle right now.
You think it's gotten more sensitive, or because you think it's no longer as apt or relevant?
No, I think the way we frame things and the way we talk about things, we are a lot all over the world, but particularly, and I've chatted to my friends in the Pacific Northwest, and Seattle's quite a mindful city. It's quite open. It's got a lot of lovely, great things going for it. But I think the way people talk about it, it's a lot more polite. Maybe there's a little bit of a sort of polite distance,
Mm.
and sort of even then that show we did was a little bit shocking, and it was hugely popular as well. But it
Mm.
sort of it challenged people, if there was something happening around race, and there was probably a large amount of the audience were white people, they would sort of look around to see if it was okay to laugh, to see how
Mm.
many, if there were African American people or people of color were laughing at this. So this to me was really interesting to do. There's a higher level of fear and danger, and there's more, maybe the stakes are higher now. I don't know. I don't think we could do this in the same way and have the same reaction for sure as we did say 10, 15 years ago.
Yes, and this idea of allowed and who's making the rules. So where this concept of you can't do that comes from. So who's saying to don't touch the wet paint? And this idea of looking to whether they be peers or strangers for allowance, for you being able to feel or express how it is that you feel, is really fascinating. And this concept of where taboo comes from, or who's drawing lines or creating the boxes within which you are allowed to play or not. Hence why I asked the question about, like, should we poke at something because we're not meant to? And I say
Mm-hmm.
we, not we society. I don't mean we over afternoon tea making jokes necessarily, but more to do with we on stage in a space where it's potentially designed for unpacking and creating discourse,
Mm-hmm.
and very intentionally displaying and unfurling the generally untidy kind of like under things of our feelings. Yes, this idea of who's allowed and who can create the lines and how that works. And if you, the performer, you, the individual, you, the speaker, the writer, the director, the performer, is part of the creating, of the lines?
It's just a conversation that should be making us uncomfortable to have. I mean, we should be challenged. There's a lot of people who think, oh, I can do anything. And at the other extreme, you'll have people like, no, you can never talk about this ever, because those people need to be taken care of.
Mm,
That conversation is also, so people need to be called on that stuff. For other people, though, for friends of mine, for other improvisers, it's very, pardon the pun, it's very black and white, this conversation. There's just stuff you do and stuff you don't do.
mm,
And maybe it's just my nature. I want to have conversations around things, but also it's not somebody's responsibility to explain why something's offensive to them. People of color, for example, are constantly getting, why is this offensive? It's not their job to always be educating us. This is kind of conversations we should be having, but
mm.
we don't want to burn people out as well.
Yeah, yeah. One of the things I find is interesting is what you bring with you as an individual that people may not know about. And so, okay, so I'm allowed to talk about something if it offends me. Okay, it's my right to own that and bring that topic up or whatever, right? But what about the things that I have that I hold with me that you don't know about, whether it's where I'm from or I don't know, a religion I identify with, an experience that I had, who my partner is, or whatever, right? So these things that are the less obvious aspects about oneself. I'm curious about this idea of performance being reflective of your background and maybe not
Mm-hmm.
necessarily just what it is that you portray here in your visage, but what it is that you hold within or behind, or the fact that you lived in the US and so you have an experience, a cultural experience, which is potentially relevant to some conversations and what you can bring into a performance.
If we go down that road, we don't always know. We may get it very wrong by people's facade, what we think they are identifying as. Are they identifying as a woman or a man? We may get that complete, or no gender or fluid. We may get that completely wrong. And I think that's what's happening a lot more is the difference maybe between workshops in Europe that you will notice, and it's changing, is at the beginning of a workshop, a facilitator from the States would very often introduce themselves and may offer their pronouns, their preferred
Yeah,
pronouns.
yeah.
Um, if you walk into a workshop in Europe now, it is changing, but people will go, what? What? Especially if, they're from Finland and they don't have pronouns. And they're like, what are you making such a big deal about this? But, even just the geographical difference about that. And me, like you said, coming from someone who's lived in the US and lived in Ireland and works mainly in Europe now, it's being aware of where you are, being aware of, if you're doing a show, who you're on stage with, I think is really valuable. And when you go to a festival show and you're on stage with people who have a lot of experience or they're good improvisers or whatever, so there's a certain amount of an understanding just on an artistic level, but you don't know their background, you don't know their orientation, you don't know what they'll find offensive. So some people just throw stuff out there and then try and read and pick up cues from somebody. It's like, am I going too far with this, or am I
Mm,
not? I mean, there's like anything in improv, I think there's no right and wrong, but
mm,
it's really good to chat about stuff before you go on stage. Talk about consent, talk about touch, all
mm.
of that stuff, which I think we did not do 10 years ago as much, you
Yeah.
know.
I was in Scotland a little while ago and I used to live there. And in Scotland, there is a big aspect of, especially within stand up, but within performance. I saw an improv show, and some of the brand ethos oftentimes is to be quite intentionally offensive to the audience. And it's sort of crazy to me, this idea that the audience laps it up. So the performers are like, fuck you. And the audience is like, yeah, give it to us. It's almost this like emotional S&M vibe. But that is okay there. And that could not play somewhere else. People would be like, fuck you, I'm leaving. But it's totally allowed in that space, that geography, that created atmosphere. And I'm wondering, I'll put my hand up and say, I'm from California, so I'm not just from the US, but the Bay Area. And I come from a hotbed of the inception point of many different movements. And we own and love that and are proud of that. And I wonder sometimes how much of this discussion that we've been having is seen through an American lens. And having spent time in America, you can speak to this, and how much of it is truly a universal discussion or a European discussion? Is it really that America is bleeding its thoughts through the media and different places and other places are adopting this? Is it organically popping up? I'm rambling now, I'll shut up.
Yeah, no. I often think, particularly discussions about what is PC, for want of a better word, but I mean it more sincerely than that, is often being discussed through an American lens. I can see that perspective, and I can also see how, particularly conversations about being inclusive and people saying, well, I live in a 98% white village in the middle of Central Europe. What do you want me to do about this? And this big raging argument happens. So I do think we view things through an American lens a lot. Let's just even specify about improv, because a lot of great teachers come and they teach. They've started to come into Europe now with an American perspective and bring in their influence. But I also think Europe is just evolving in a maybe slightly different way, where this parallel universe, and we are having similar conversations, but the root is not the same. So when you talk to somebody about race in their country, the journey there would have been quite different to say the journey of somebody in Chicago or Seattle. And I think the lens is often, because it's a huge country and it's really powerful, it's very influential in the arts as well. So sometimes there is a danger that, I do think conversations are happening independently, but I think how we've gotten to them may be slightly different.
Yeah, well, rightly put, I think. I'm going to wrap us up there, and I'm glad that you brought us full circle back to improv, because I think that this could get entirely tangential, but not that it doesn't deserve it. We have only just really skimmed many different surfaces at once. Thank you for where we took this so far. I would ask now, what are your words of wisdom? What do you want people to know? If you met your younger self or improv peers, someone curious about improv, what do you want them to know? What are your words of wisdom?
Ooh, I'm trying to remember who was Chris Mead, may have written a lovely blog about finding your tribe. And I would say, to me, that's very important. I'm part of a couple of beautiful projects, the Ohana Project, which is a collective of European improvisers, and also part of Project Eve, which is a collective of European women in improv. And even younger, I think people are so desperate to do improv that they will sort of force things to happen that aren't necessarily what they're really feeling, because they just want to get up on stage. And I think take a breath and slow down and, jam with a few people, find out who you really dig and who you want to do more stuff with and who excites you to get on stage with. I think if I knew more of that when I was younger, and I was lucky enough to find that quite young, find somebody you really connect with as a person, or even just like pokes at you a little bit, but is great artistically, and work with them, do workshops together, go to festivals together with them, try and just find somebody you really buzz off. And I think that will really serve your work if you listen to your little voice while you're exploring.
So, Orla, if people want to get a hold of you, how can they find you? They want to throw money at you, hire you for things, work with you, jam with you. Where are you?
I have an artist page on Facebook, The Órla McGovern. You can also find me at orlamcgovern.com, and I have a little coffee page right now. We're all taking tips for doing our art online, so you can find me on there. It's called coffee.com. People buy you a cup of coffee, basically. They like your work.
I will put links below to the various ways that you can find Orla. And if you happen to be in Galway and she is at the same time, potentially you can meet up and jam or chat or buy her a coffee. She is thirsty. All right.
I might even buy you a beer back instead. So it's kind of this thing that will go on for hours. And then, then it's 3 a.m. What do we do?
Yeah. Thank you so very much for your time. Thank you all for tuning in. More on Improving the World. Bye-bye. So, she was great, right? Oh, no. If you thought wonderful and beautiful things, please write them down below and look for more episodes of Improving the World, and or send fantastic ladies my way if they're improvisers, or if you're one. Are you one? You come find me. Okay, bye.